Okay, this video, when I originally put the order together for the information, this was going to be part 2, section 11, and that was going to be like video number 27. But I wanted to move it nearer the beginning, and this is because when we consider the points in this section, it makes reading a spread an awful lot easier because you've got something to build on at that point, and you're building on something more than just your own intuition or the situation where you're keeping your fingers crossed, hoping that you're right and that what you're going to say is going to be good. Because the thing is, you can read the tarot starting from where you are right now without knowing a lot, let's say. But I want to say it's better if you have some guidelines to follow. It makes everything an awful lot easier. You have more confidence. You're able to make more sense of the cards if you've got some guidelines. And so this is part 1, section 2, and it's called The Advantage of Knowing Rules. Okay, so lots of people buy a deck of cards and they start doing readings. They begin with where they are and with their current state of understanding. And, you know, people ask questions, they give answers, they try to do a good job. And that's fair enough. And I'm not against the intention of trying to do a good job. At the same time, though, I think we tend to assume that what we think is true, right? And what we see is the truth. So we've got the cards there and we're talking, we're assuming that what we're saying is true. But the problem is, I think, that a lot of our opinions are just things we believe without any good reason for them. We may have accepted what people told us years ago or last week, and we just accept it as being true without examining it or thinking about it. Or maybe there's some weird family belief that we follow. You know, if you get 20 years of people saying something, you tend to, you know, it can sink in and you tend to accept it or believe it or trust it, even if it doesn't make any kind of sense or if it's basically wrong. And also it can be that we can accept something because a particular opinion fits our personal experience. And then we can assume that if it's true for us, it's true for everyone, even though this often, or maybe even usually, isn't the case. So trying to think of an example, and my wife's father, he was born in 1920. And so he was a teenager in the Depression in the early 1930s. And when he first started work, his name was Richard. So Richard's thinking was, I've got to keep a low profile and not draw attention to myself, right? You don't want to give the boss a reason to fire you. It would get rid of you. So his whole thinking was kind of fearful, but it suited him and his personality, and it worked quite well because he tended to get jobs and was able to keep them. But the thing is, once I heard him giving advice about how to behave at work to my son, who was about 20 at the time. So Richard kept saying, or he was saying, you know, keep your head down and don't speak up. And if you see something not working, let somebody else point it out, because then it's going to be the troublemaker who's going to get it if things go wrong. That kind of advice. I thought this is a terrible thing to say to anybody. So let's imagine Richard with that kind of outlook and those kind of beliefs. Let's imagine him doing a tarot reading for somebody who wants to know about work. So let's say he gets the 3 of Swords or the 10 of Swords or some card of difficulty. We can imagine how he's going to interpret it. So he would say the card means difficulty, right? And the person says, okay, what do I do? And Richard would say, okay, keep your head down. That type of advice, even if the question was full of ideas, was ambitious, had good ideas for how to improve efficiency or how to make the company better. Because as far as Richard was concerned, keeping quiet is the truth. And that's the best thing to do always. So in general, I think it's not enough to just start from where you are and assume that you know the truth, or that the truth is in the cards, as some people say. Maybe the truth is in the cards, but you can't assume that you're going to be able automatically to see it and to read it. And another point is that most of us, and probably all of us, have been bent out of shape, or we've been damaged, at least to some extent, by life, just because that's what happens. Right? People point us in the wrong direction. They may mean well, they may just not know any better themselves, but they give us bad advice, or they give us false information. This can be big things as well as little things. So they tell us what they think is the truth, or they tell us something that got them through a difficulty, even if it was not very effective advice, or it wasn't a very effective method they had. They'll still pass on this information as if it's, ultimate truth. And they'll tell us, even if we are not going through that kind of difficulty that they went through, and even if we never will go through that kind of difficulty, but they still think they're telling you the truth. So I'm saying to some extent we've been damaged, and I assume we don't want to impose our damage on the questioner. And I think that means that the reader should be becoming aware of what's actually true and promoting the truth. And I'm going to suggest in a minute how we can find it. So I'm saying we should find and follow the truth. But a lot of people take the opposite approach. Instead of trying to find out what's right, they try to discover what's wrong, or they want to uncover lies, or to recognize all the ways in which we've been hurt or suffered. Right, but this is going to take forever, and it's never ending. And I think it just adds to the negativity that's around us and that people live in. Partly because you can, in trying to find out what's wrong, you can have taken something the wrong way, right? So you experience pain, but you created it for yourself. It wasn't anything to do with the other person, because it was because you misunderstood. But we often blame other people or try to change them to suit ourselves, and this doesn't really work. It's a bit like some people, you can say, you can ask yourself, why am I such a loser? Or why do I keep failing? And you're going to come up with hundreds of reasons why you keep failing. But that really doesn't help if you want to succeed. So instead of asking, why am I such a loser? What you say is, how can I be a winner? Or how can I be successful? Or what can I do to achieve the success that I want? And that's sort of going for truth rather than trying to discover what's wrong and then eliminate what's wrong. It takes forever, and it doesn't, I don't think it works, because it doesn't get you any closer to doing things correctly. All it does is give you a longer list of ways in which you're not right. So I'm saying let's cut out the middleman, so to speak, and get to the point, and learn to recognize and apply the truth. And this position I'm taking, this is part of the reason I don't have much confidence in intuitives or psychics, because I think too often they're talking about themselves and what they ought to be doing for themselves, instead of starting with the question of situation and finding solutions. So how do we find truth? I think we need to read and educate ourselves. And that's the only way to do it. I don't think you can look to somebody else to tell you it. Well, to people, friends and family, or find a mentor or someone. I realize I may be contradicting myself, but I'm saying educate ourselves, read poetry, and read Shakespeare, and read great literature and philosophy. I realize you can say, okay, well, I'm reading poetry, so I'm following the teachings of somebody else. It's kind of different. It's like you're dealing with and recognizing what has always been true and what will always be true. That's the kind of truth I'm talking about. You can also go online and read quotes. And I'm saying as well, pay attention to Bob Dylan, because he said things like, though the rules of the road have been lodged, it's people's games you've got to dodge. Which is so true. And if we can look at what goes on with people and realize they're playing games, do I want to get involved in their games, or do I want to, follow proper rules? And with that in mind, take a look at Vernon Howard, because he shows you in his various books how to recognize people's games and what to do about them so you don't get sucked into them. I think that, like poetry and Shakespeare and philosophy and so on, that's how we can learn the truth. And I'm saying this because that's going to make you a better tarot reader. And it's in part because you've got something useful to say. Even if you're not that old, or even if you've lived a sheltered life and don't have that much experience, you can still pass along inspiring thoughts and information that's always been true and useful about how best to live as fully as you can. And so when it comes to the tarot, if you look at the picture or the pictures on the Rider-Waite deck and use the picture as a starting point to answer questions, that's going to illuminate and make clear the situation for the questioner. And I think this means as well that you're working with the truth and everybody benefits. I'd like to give a couple of examples about different positions. So, if you know how a basketball game is played, if you know how a baseball game is played, you follow along and you don't have to keep asking somebody else, why is he throwing the ball 7 times when he only threw 4 to the last batter? Or why is the batter still there when he missed hitting the ball? If you know the rules, you don't need to ask questions. You understand what's going on. Or let's say you've got some paints. You can make a picture and it might be quite good, it might be okay. But it could also be quite bad, as you probably know if you've looked at bad art. But when you know the laws, or when you know the rules of colour, and what goes with what, and what colours bring out what other colours, then you can do a more convincing job and make a much more pleasing picture. And it's the same with music. You can pick out a tune by hit and miss. Right, you play the odd note and eventually develop the tune. But when you know some scales and when you know some chords and what notes work together to produce particular moods, because C major is very different from D flat minor, the chord itself and the atmosphere that it conjures up. When you understand something about chords and scales, you're going to be able to play better. And the other thing is, when you know the rules, you can break them and it works. So I'm imagining that you're not happy with the hit and miss approach to tarot reading. You know, pick a card and try and do something with it. Because if you were happy with the hit and miss approach, you wouldn't be watching this video. So what can we do that puts us more in tune with what we can call the inner tarot, the part of you that already understands what's going on and how to read correctly? At the same time, I don't really want to talk about rules as if there are certain fixed regulations for making sense of a spread and you have to follow what somebody else tells you. Because somehow that's a bit too rigid and gets you stuck and trapped. Whereas the tarot is more in the moment and about dealing with the actual situation right now for what makes sense right now, even though a similar situation a week from now you would handle slightly differently. So I'm saying there are rules, but you know, I don't want to suggest that rules are fixed. But at the same time, I do think that some approaches produce more consistent results than others, and we do better as readers if we follow certain procedures. So a lot of the method I show in the next few sections is about asking yourself questions about what would be sensible for a past, present, and future reading. And taking this approach can have similar results to learning the rules. So when you turn cards, you just start talking during the reading, but you're talking from a position of some understanding because you've got various questions going over in your mind. And because you start from that, from questions, you do a better job because it's no longer a case of hit and miss and keeping your fingers crossed that you're going to be right. Asking yourself questions and thinking things through works because you're also not trying to impose some theoretically correct structure or model onto the reading and onto the answer. So it means that the reading can be fresh and relevant for that questioner at that time. Because we have to remember that with a tarot reading, we're dealing with life and how the questioner is living it. And living isn't like a machine that works in only one way. So a lot of, maybe even most tarot instructors might want to give you a system for coming up with meanings and figuring out answers, right? And the examples they give will show that the system works well. But the problem is, it's not always so easy to use it in a real life reading or a real life situation with an actual person who wants answers to questions that are important to them. Whereas if we look at the pictures in the rider deck and make sense of them, we're going to get results. There's another point in favor of asking yourself questions, and it's that it makes it easier to be flexible in a reading. When you have multiple questions in your mind, and I'll show you what I mean by that and give you examples. When you have multiple questions in your mind, then you can be flexible in what you talk about or in the information you derive from the cards that come up in a reading. So you can be in the moment and talk about what's relevant for that particular questioner at that time. Because it's one thing to talk great and profound spiritual truths, but there's not much point in talking along those lines if the questioner just wants to know what to do with a teenager who's being difficult, right? They want practical, realistic solutions to a particular problem. They're not that interested in, and maybe don't see how great spiritual truth is going to help them. Okay, so let's say that the last reading you did or that we did let's say it was about a relationship, and we had the King of Cups in the past, and we discovered from the other questioner that the King of Cups, it referred to somebody outside the relationship, right? Relationship question, King of Cups, and it was somebody else. Now, in a new reading, let's say there's a court card in the past as well. It might, but only might, also show somebody outside the relationship, but it doesn't have to. So because it happened that way in the past, it doesn't mean that's what's going on right now, or that's what the correct answer will be for somebody else in the future. So if you turn the card for the past in the relationship spread and immediately happen to remember that previous reading where the court card in the past represented somebody outside the relationship, keep talking, go for it, and talk about who the other person might be. Because that's like trusting yourself and trusting the tarot and trusting the whole process and not having doubt. Like, just go, if that's what comes to mind, then start talking about it. But if you turn that same card and you find yourself looking at the court card and talking about the strengths and weaknesses of that particular card or the person represented by that card, or talking about, let's say, the court card representing a situation or a conflict, so you're talking about related information, that's okay as well. And you can safely ignore other readings where the court card in the past represented somebody else outside the relationship. So you don't have to consciously remember everything you've ever said in a reading. But if you trust yourself and the thoughts that come to mind with that actual person at that time, that's how it works. And I think this is part of the reason why the tarot can be so hard to read. In a way, nothing is fixed, but in the beginning, we like to be sure that we're doing a good job or that we're getting the right answer. So we prefer fixed meanings. But this is also why the tarot can be so accurate, because it shows the current situation clearly, and the current situation may have nothing much to do with what has gone on before. So that was section 2, and in section 3, I give you an idea of the method or the procedure that we're going to follow in the course.